Welcome back, everybody, to our studies in AQA A-Level Politics. In this lesson, what we're going to do is move on to topic number 6 in the specification. This topic focusing on the idea of democracy and participation. Now, we've done democracy and participation lessons in the past, a good 4 years ago, I believe, maybe 5 years ago. I think it was towards the end of 2019 I first started making lessons on democracy and participation. And I think it's high time for there to be a bit of an update and a bit more of a substantive look at the A-level specification and some of the areas that were missed out upon when we looked at democracy and participation in the past. So this lesson is going to talk about the nature of democracy. And generally speaking, this is not going to be a lesson that goes into necessarily too much detail, but it will give us an indication of what democracy is, where there was the definition of democracy, how that came about from the ancient Greeks, the sort of early instances of where democracy flourished in ancient Greek history, and then starting to look at some of the issues and challenges, as well as the distinctions and different types of democracy which exist in the world, fundamentally, and in history. Now, fundamentally, this is what the specification says in relation to the democracy and participation topic. So we're going to have to talk about the ways in which suffrage in the UK took place and developed. That's something that we will look at in a couple of lessons' time, looking at the Great Reform Act, looking at debates regarding gender, class, ethnicity, and age, as well as some of the more important elements in terms of the history, the Chartist movement, the suffragettes, and the suffragettes, all these different kinds of individuals. But firstly, we're going to talk about the nature of democracy in this lesson, as well as different types of democracy, direct, representative, and participation in democracy as well, all obviously from the perspective of the United Kingdom. So, as mentioned, therefore, what we're doing is talking about the nature of democracy from a general context, okay? Looking at its definition, its historical development, and how it can be applied to the UK's political system. Now, the first thing that we're going to note here is the basic definition of what democracy actually is. The first question that you're going to ask when thinking about democracy and participation is, what is democracy? Well, the word itself derives from the ancient Greek, and it comes from a combination of two Greek words. It's etymology. Etymology is just the study of words and their derivations. So the etymology of a word is where that word comes from. It comes from two Greek words. The first being demos, and the second being kratos. The first word demos meaning people, and kratos meaning rule or strength or power. So together, these two words form the Greek word demokratia. Demokratia referring to the power of the people or rule of the people. And this is essentially the definition, literally taken and translated from the ancient Greek. We see here that it literally means rule of the people or power of the people. And it makes sense. That's what democracy essentially means. The people in this definition is society. Now, what actually was considered to be the people, in inverted commas, obviously has changed over many, many years. If you were living in the United States in 1776, when the revolution had happened and democracy was, or at least a constitution was created, the idea of the people discounted black people who were considered slaves until slavery was abolished. If you're in the United Kingdom, if you're in Great Britain, and you're talking from prior to the First World War, then the idea of the people included mostly men of a certain category in terms of class, maybe property owning and all this, and it didn't include women, and so universal suffrage was something that was fought for. So over the years, the idea of more and more people getting the right to vote has been something that has essentially changed the definition of democracy, specifically the demos part of democracy. The idea of the people, the nature of the people has changed, but the power and the rule that they have been given hasn't changed. This idea of them being able to elect and to vote and to have direct participation in the political system is something that, of course, has happened since democracy has been invented. So the concept itself, in terms of the history, emerged in ancient Athens. Ancient Athens was a Greek city-state. There were a number of Greek city-states that existed in and around ancient Greece. You have Athens, you have Sparta, for example. Those are the sort of two most famous ones. Around the 5th century BCE, this is really where citizens were able to participate directly in the decision-making process through a number of different government institutions in ancient Athens. These government institutions included assemblies on the one hand, as well as juries on the other. And so really, generally speaking, democracy, the idea of democracy as a mode of government, reflects the idea of political power being something that resides in a collective body of citizens. And there are lots of different alternatives and different modes in which government can be structured. So monarchy, for example, is such a case where the monarch, an individual who has the divine right of kings and queens, has full control over the political system and the political process. You have tyranny and dictatorship and totalitarianism, where a particular individual has unlimited power over their subjects. You have oligarchy, and you have things and aristocracy, and all of these different kinds of modes of government. Now, what's really interesting is some of the early ancient Greek philosophers, people like Plato and people like Aristotle, didn't actually believe democracy was a very good system. They believed that democracy can lead to what is known as the tyranny of the majority, which is a phrase that wasn't directly stated by Plato and Aristotle, but was developed by individuals such as John Stuart Mill in the late 1800s. But they believed that, specifically Plato believed that government should be ran by what he called philosopher kings, individuals who were born to rule and were trained in the very, very fine art of government and ruling. And Plato believed that one of the things that was really important for government and ruling was philosophy, was the idea of being a philosopher and philosophizing. I wonder why he thought that, him as a philosopher himself. But generally speaking, over time, the concept of democracy being this idea of power to the people has changed and developed and diversified to the point in which it actually represents a variety of different forms of governance. So, for example, the way in which democracy operates in the United Kingdom is different to even the way democracy operates in the United States. And when you do comparative politics in your second year of your A-levels and you're looking at the United States system, you will see that the United States has elections, of course, but the ways in which it works is a little bit different. It is, and there are lots of constitutional frameworks that are different to the United Kingdom system. And so, even though they're both democracies per se, they are very, very different ways of government. Modern democracies, while they are rooted in the principles of this ancient Greek theory, the idea of power to the people in its most simple form, they will often involve representative institutions or mechanisms that essentially enhance and broaden citizen participation. And it's for this reason that a system of government which is vested, in which power is vested in the people, who rule either directly or through elected representatives, this is considered to be a more specific definition of the kind of democracies that we see that exist today, rather than the ones that existed in ancient Greece. It embodies the principles of political equality. It embodies this idea of a rule by the majority. It embodies this idea that where there is a minority of opinion and political diversity, that there is rights for those individuals, as well as the respect for basic civil liberties. These are all basic liberal Enlightenment principles of democracy. And so as a result of which, we see that democracy is really widely utilized and widely recognized, and represents various forms where popular sovereignty exists. And this is really where we go from looking at the nature of democracy to looking at the different types of democracy. Different types of democracies include direct democracy, which we will look at in a future lesson. Similarly with representative democracy, parliamentary democracy, presidential democracy, all of them being very, very similar in the sense that popular sovereignty is vested in the people, but they have very, very different modes of governance and adhering to various different rules and principles of popular rule and political equality. So I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. Be sure to stay tuned for the next lesson. These are some of the basic citations and further reading that you might want to look at for UK politics. Specifically, we're looking, of course, if you have a look down these citations and further reading, we're specifically referring to we're referring to A-level textbooks for the most part. So the Lemieux textbooks are very, very influential and important when it comes to this. But generally speaking, we're just following the specification as we go along as well. So stay tuned for the next lesson on this question of democracy.